Good morning, Wabash. Speaking today at Pioneer Chapel will be Tyler Wade with his talk titled Scientiae et Virtuti. Tyler Wade serves Wabash as Director of Pre-College Programs and Associate Director of Admissions. He graduated from Wabash in 2012 and earned his master's degree in Student Affairs and Higher Education at Miami University. He has worked in the admissions office since 2014 and recruits students from Texas and Marion and in Johnson counties in Indiana. A native of Greencastle, T. Wade spends most of his time watching sports, talking politics, listening to podcasts, drinking coffee, and doing the New York Times crossword. Let's give a warm welcome to Tyler.
Good morning, Wabash. Before we get started, I want to give a special birthday shout out to Chris Runyon. It's Chris's 21st birthday. Make good decisions. Nearly 100 years ago, this chapel, where you now sit and I stand, was dedicated in honor of the pioneers of Indiana. At that moment in our history, the college was preparing to celebrate its 100th anniversary. And the fact that Wabash had survived to that milestone was, by any honest measure, something of a miracle. The college had faced more hardship in the first century than most institutions face in 5. A fire had destroyed its only building within just a few years of its founding. It sent its sons to fight in the Civil War. It endured debt, shrinking enrollments, political turmoil, and just a few years before the chapel was dedicated, the devastating human cost of the First World War. And still, Wabash stood. Sometimes, I think we take that resilience for granted. Each fall, when we see students moving on to campus, faculty update their course syllabi, sports schedules get released, and we assume that this place in its permanence will always be there. But the truth is, this college has always existed because people believed in something more important than comfort or convenience. They believed in character. They believed in formation. They believed in preparing young men to live lives not only of success, but of purpose. That purpose is summed up in the words that have defined Wabash for generations, our college's motto, Scientiae et Virtuti. Know-how and guts, as President Thad Seymour famously translated it. But today I want to use an older translation offered by Wabash historians Groner and Osborne in their edition of the first 100 years for wisdom and righteousness. That's the mission I want to explore with you this morning. Not just what it meant 100 years ago, but what it means right now. What it means to pursue wisdom and righteousness in a time as complicated and as charged as ours, because we need those words now more than ever. To understand how deeply rooted our mission is, you must go back to our very founding. The year was 1832. Crawfordsville was little more than a rugged crossroads. No rail lines, no modern comforts, just a small group of Presbyterian missionaries and educators with a wild idea that young men on the frontier deserved an education equal to those found in New York City, Boston, Philadelphia, or New Haven. They had no endowment, they had no buildings, no faculty to speak of, just a vision and the conviction that education could shape civilization. They built that first classroom by hand. They taught in rough log structures with unheated rooms. And within a few years of their opening, the only permanent building burnt to the ground. No backup campus, no donor lifeline, no online learning contingency, just ashes. And yet they rebuilt. Then came the Civil War. Young Wabash men left their books to serve in the Union Army. Professors enlisted, classrooms emptied, some students never returned. Enrollment plummeted. The college came desperately close to closure, but it held on. Then came the Great War, the Depression, and another World War. Each time, men left, resources vanished, hope wore thin, and still Wabash stood. This college was never protected by its wealth or size. What protected it was purpose. It survived because people believed fiercely in what it stood for, that education should be rigorous and humane, that intellect without integrity is empty, that forming men of thought and character is a cause worth the fight, and fight they did. Every student who chose to enroll, every professor who stayed, every donor who scraped together support, they built this place for you, for us. In the early 1920s, nearly a century after Wabash was founded, the college called a new president, Lewis Bertram Hopkins. Hopkins was different. He wasn't a minister like his predecessors. He wasn't even a longtime faculty member. He came from a world beyond the academy, a psychologist by training, a business leader by experience, and a public servant during World War I. He worked for General Electric and had been brought into Woodrow Wilson's administration to help modernize how the U.S. military would evaluate recruits and manage its personnel. He was a reformer, a modernizer, a man of systems and strategy. And yet, when he stood to deliver his inaugural address, he didn't talk about modernization or expansion of budgets. He reached all the way back to our founding president, Elihu Baldwin, and said this, quote, "Education in its application to the mind comprises the development, right direction, and permanent discipline of all its powers." In that one sentence, he reaffirmed that Wabash wasn't just about producing smart men, it was about producing whole men. Men who didn't just know things, but men who knew what to do with what they knew. Hopkins told the campus, "Today it stands, as it stood then, the purpose of this college." That kind of moral clarity is rare, and that's why it matters so much. Because the world has never been short on cleverness. What it has always needed more of is wisdom. What it always has depended on is righteousness. That's what Hopkins saw in Wabash and what he fought to preserve. And the truth is, his vision still holds. It's one thing to say wisdom and righteousness are important, but what do they actually look like then? Let's take two snapshots. First, 1832. Founders of the college were not naive about the world. They lived in a nation already divided by slavery. They knew that building a liberal arts college in the rural Midwest was not a safe bet, and yet they invested in this dream, not because they were guaranteed success, but because they believed deeply in the power of education to shape young men of substance. Now jump forward nearly a century to 1929. Picture it, Wabash students filling this newly dedicated chapel. In fact, interestingly enough, the chapel was supposed to open in 1928, but they couldn't meet in person because of a deadly global pandemic. Wabash students filling the chapel. They'd grown up in the aftermath of the war to end all wars. They believed they were entering an era of peace and prosperity. There was optimism in the air. The economy was booming. The future seemed full of promise. But later that same year, the stock market crashed. The Great Depression began. Banks failed. Jobs disappeared. Families lost everything. And at the same time, something darker was unfolding nearby. In Indiana, the Ku Klux Klan had gained enormous political power. D.C. Stevenson, the Klan's grand dragon, boasted, "I am the law." And for a while, he wasn't wrong. In fact, about 1/3 of all Indiana men were members of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s. By 1925, the Klan controlled the state legislature, they had the governor's ear, and they wanted more, maybe even a shot at the presidency. But take the brutal and tragic death of Madge Oberholzer at Stevenson's hands to finally crack the illusion and expose their rot. That's what wisdom and righteousness required then, to see clearly in a time of deception, to act with courage in a time with fear, to hold principle when power was cheap and cruelty was easy. And looking back, we'd like to think we know how we would have responded, that we would have spoken up, that we would have seen through the lies, that we would have stood on the right side. But history tells us it's not always so obvious in the moment. We know it's wrong, looking back, for Bull Connor to turn loose the dogs and turn on the fire hoses against civil rights protesters in Alabama in the 1960s. But when President Trump used federal officers to clear Lafayette Square during the George Floyd protest for a photo op of him holding a book he hasn't read in front of a place he doesn't go to, many of us stood still. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's name is synonymous with cowardice and appeasement because he failed to stand up to a brutal dictator threatening to take over Europe. And yet today, we turn our backs on our Ukrainian brothers and sisters fighting against Putin's invasion. And now here we are, it's 2025, and we are living in a moment that, like 1832 and 1929, will be judged by those who come after us. What will they see? What will they say about how we acted? What we stood for? What we let slide? Because there's no denying it, these are troubled times. Wars rage in Europe and the Middle East. Democracy is breaking down in places where stability once felt certain. Global economies shift overnight. The cost of health care and housing and education has put the American dream out of reach for many. Here at home, the public square feels more like a battlefield. Civility is slipping. Truth is contested. Trust in government, media, even higher education is at an all-time low. And we feel it here too, even on this campus, even a place as small and as close-knit as Wabash. We've ignored racism faced by our brothers and sisters of color. We've seen homophobia displayed by the mass removal of pride flags from the mall. The postage days made on Yik Yak are enough to make anyone feel like they don't belong here. We have felt the discomfort that comes when we realize that we are not immune from the ills of the world. But these challenges, these fractures, are not reasons to give up. They are reminders of why this place matters. Because when the world is confusing, we need clarity. When the world is loud, we need discernment. When the world is cruel, we need conscience. And that's what Wabash has always tried to provide. Not just knowledge, but judgment. Not just freedom, but responsibility. Not just tradition, but moral direction. This is the time we've been given, and those are the values we must carry forward. When I was writing this speech, I kept returning to two voices from Wabash history, voices that echo through the walls of this place. The first was Elihu Baldwin, our first president, who laid the foundation of Wabash not just with policy, but with purpose. He said that education should aim at the, quote, right direction and permanent discipline of all its powers. He believed in formation of the mind, the heart, and the moral compass. The second voice was Professor Bill Plaker. Many of you know the name. Some of you may have read his work. But even if you haven't, you felt his influence, because Plaker had a gift for cutting through the noise and reminding us of what Wabash really stands for. During the college's sesquicentennial celebration, that's 150 years for folks that don't know, Plaker said something that's been quoted many times, and it's worth repeating here. A commitment to some moral values, honesty, open-mindedness, a degree of tolerance, caring about human individuals is built into the nature of what we do here. Then he went further. He said, maybe we ought to make those values more explicit, to make it clear that Wabash graduates who turn out to be crooks or bigots or, as I'll add, attorneys general, represent not only a personal disappointment, but an educational failure. That's strong language, but it's the kind of clarity that we need. Because Wabash isn't just about achievement, it's about alignment between what you know and how you live. The college doesn't exist to flatter you, it exists to form you, to challenge you, to stretch you, to make sure that when you leave this campus, you don't just have credentials, you have convictions. That's the legacy that Baldwin gave us. That's the challenge that Plaker put before us. And now, it's your challenge too. So how do we do it? What does it actually mean to live out wisdom and righteousness right now as a college student in 2025? Because those words can feel a little lofty. They sound like something out of a statue inscription, not something that shows up in your daily life, but they should. In fact, they must. Wisdom and righteousness are not about being perfect. They're about how you carry yourself when no one is watching. They're about the choices you make when you don't think they matter, because they do. So let's break it down. Wisdom might mean listening before you speak, asking a question instead of pretending you already know the answer, choosing to think deeply instead of reacting quickly, owning what you don't know and being hungry to learn, submitting your FAFSA before the April 15th Indiana State filing deadline. Righteousness might mean not joining in when the group turns cruel, calling something out, even when it's uncomfortable, saying I was wrong and meaning it, protecting someone's dignity, even when it costs you. It's easy to believe that character only shows up in big, dramatic moments, but most of the time, character shows up in the quiet ones. When you choose honesty over convenience, when you refuse to laugh at someone else's expense, when you stop and ask yourself, is this who I want to be? Because that's what our motto is really about. Scientiae et Virtuti isn't just about guts in the battle or smarts in the classroom. It's about living with integrity in the ordinary moments that make up an extraordinary life. And if you start now on this campus, in these years, you'll leave with something far more powerful than a diploma. You'll leave with a compass. Now, this is the part of the speech where I'm supposed to wrap things up, to bring it all together, to land the plane, as Professor Himsel would say. But I don't want to end with a summary. I want to end with a challenge, because here's the truth. You don't have to fix the world. You don't have to carry every burden or win every argument or change every mind. But you do have to decide who you're going to be. And you have to decide that right now. Because character isn't something you build later, once you've made it. It's something you start forming now, with the words you use, the jokes you laugh at, the effort you give, the kindness you show. It's how you show up in this chapel. It's how you show up in your fraternity house or residence hall. It's how you act during practice or on the field or court against our biggest rivals. It's how you show up for others when it'd be easier to stay silent. Wabash men are not called to be flawless, but you are called to be watchful. Watchful of your words, watchful of your actions, watchful of the kind of man you're becoming. And the good news is you don't have to do it alone. You have each other. You have professors, faculty, and staff who care. You have a college that believes you are worth the effort. So here's my challenge to you. Be a man of substance. Be a man of humility. Be a man of courage. Be a man who learns, yes, but more than that, a man who listens. Be a man who wins, but more than that, a man who lifts others up. Be a man who speaks truth, but more than that, who lives it. Because if you do, if you pursue wisdom and righteousness, you won't just be honoring a motto, you'll be honoring this place. You'll be honoring every man who came before you, and you'll be building up a future that this college, this country, and this world desperately needs. So be wise, be righteous, be watchful, and maybe, just maybe, have the guts to do what's right. Thank you.
A few final announcements. La Alianza Spring Festival fundraiser is tomorrow at 4 o'clock at Mud Hollow. Get ready for a fantastic day of brotherhood and good food. At 12 o'clock on Saturday, baseball will be facing Hiram. Then this weekend, volleyball has two must-win games. First, on Saturday at 1 o'clock, they will face Mount Union. Then on 3 o'clock on Sunday, they will face Baldwin Wallace. They need your support, so show out and get loud. I want to thank you all for attending. Now, will you all please rise and join me in singing Old Wabash? Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. From the hills of Maine to the western plain,